I would first like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the unceded territory of the Montucket and Shinnecock tribes, who continue to have a profound presence in our community. And hello and welcome. My name is Sherry Pascarella. I'm the executive director. Welcome to the church. Anybody's first time here? I didn't think so. Welcome back, friends. We have an extraordinary conversation happening today. This will be the first part. I want to acknowledge, first of all, I want to say thank you to all of the artists and the curators that are in this room. It's an incredibly dense cultural region that we are so fortunate to live in. There are so many artists, so many makers, so many curators, and all kinds of arts facilitators and writers and makers of all sorts on the East End. We are so grateful to be in community with all of you, and thank you for being here today. And I also want to thank our director circle, who is such an indispensable part of enabling projects such as this. Today's conversation is the first in our 3 dialogues leaning into Eric Fischl's role as our curator of the summer exhibition. Our June Eric and conversation is with Amy Sillman, whom you're about to meet. Our July Eric and is with Bruce Nauman, which is next weekend. I know. I hear that hubbub. That was it's next Sunday. Yeah. I know that. And then lastly, we'll be welcoming Eric and Tom Deininger in August. So please join us if you can. Next weekend, just show up because it's sold out. But so today's conversation is presented in collaboration with our wonderful friends at the Dia Art Foundation. This is our second summer producing wonderful, thank you to Dia. And I would like to thank Jessica Morgan and David Morehouse, who could not be here today, Umberto Moro, Jordan Carter, Emily Merkant, Hannah Gompertz, and any of the other Dia Crit team. We work with them not only on producing this conversation, but some other back-end collaborations of orgs, helping orgs, and they are truly wonderful friends. We're so grateful to be in community with Dia as well. Today's conversation will center on the practice of making these wonderful exhibitions. So you will be hearing from Eric Fischl, Amy Sillman, both of whom have curated shows that are on view on the East End this summer, which you'll be hearing all about. And they are joined in conversation with Jordan Carter, curator at the Dia Foundation, and the curator of the current Amy Sillman exhibition. Before I forget anything else, would you kindly take a moment and silence your cell phones? Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the conversation. Thank you for being here.
Kristen, do I know how to do this? Is this just a click one thing or another? Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I was going to go through some of the general concepts of the exhibition, the arc that I put together over the last couple of years. And I thought I would start with this piece simply because the show did not begin as a show. It followed a natural path of interest and observation that began with this work of art by Nicola Theakston, a British sculptor, which showed up on my Pinterest one day a couple of years ago, and I clicked on it because I was so struck by the power and presence of this animal. And it took me down a very interesting path of artists, animal artists, especially that I didn't know anything about. Turns out there's a world of animal art that is its own world, and it has these incredible artisan craftspeople, visionaries as well, devoted to the animation of creatures in ways that are incredibly transmissible in terms of their presence and our relationship to it. When the concept of the show began to flesh out, which at first I was thinking, oh, it'd be so interesting to do just sculpture. Nobody does just sculpture. Having done a show of just sculpture, I now know why. But the thing of connecting the power, the mystery, the empathy, the pleasures, etc., of both animalness and also the pleasures of art making and the variety of approaches to how to make something, that becomes an even more specific part of your world. You know, it's that reach out and touch the object. It's so inviting. So seemed like that was also a necessary ingredient to where I was beginning to take the animal thing. Anyway, when you, on the picture on the left, I show only because when you come into the church, what I wanted you to do was to walk into not your world. This is their world. They're inhabiting this space, and they're very aware of your presence. And so it begins with that. I also had, I don't know how to get rid of that over there. Is that something I need to get rid of, other than it's ugly? The one thing I wanted was when I came up with this idea of a container, an ark full of the animals and stuff, which began to resonate very strongly with the backdrop of where we are today in terms of the fears and anguish that we have in relationship to both immediate issues as well as long-term issues regarding planet. The idea of an ark, I wanted this place filled with animals that had gathered, hopefully to be saved. And I wanted the feeling that some of it as art was still formal, still in its container per se, still on a base, still on under a vitrine or something. But there was also animals that seemed to have gotten out of their cages and were just sort of wandering around in some way. And also the relationship between the sort of high seriousness and then the playfulness, this crazy elephant, for example. I also wanted to try to ground the animal sculpture into a historical base that created some kind of linear progression. This is a Rembrandt Bugatti sculpture of a giraffe. He sculpted from life. Oftentimes he'd go to the Antwerp Zoo and they would bring out animals for him to work directly from life with incredible feel for both the anatomy of, the gesture of, and the sensuality of making of that physical connection was very important to me. Combining a Rembrandt Bugatti, for example, is an artist that comes out of a fine art tradition in which both animals and other arts were at one time all part of the same thing. At a certain point, they divided, and then you see that there are some artists that are connected to the art world that maintain that tradition. Daisy Youngblood being one of them. When you see the show, you'll be amazed at how small these works are. And you'll be amazed at not only how small they are, but how sentient, how full of life and concentration and moment they are. And I don't know how the fuck she does it, frankly. Here's, we have, it turns out, several owls. We have, I wasn't sort of thinking ahead, so we should have, a lot of owls, a lot of pigeons, a lot of horses, I wasn't kind of going that route, but in beginning to search for things and finding a lot of stuff within collections of people I know who collected a lot of owls. So we went with the owls. Again, what you're seeing upstairs is artists attacking from their individual creative space a common theme, which is animals in this case, all different kinds of animals, but just the sculptural approach to these two things shows the breadth of creativity. There's a Bruce Nauman and a Germaine Richier, a French artist, or maybe Swiss, I can't remember, but certainly worked in France, going through the war, very much an expressionistic approach to to sculpture, to the attack on how to make something that is fraught with power and anxiety, and I find that incredibly compelling. I connected it only in this slideshow, not in the show, connected it to the Nauman for very similar reasons in terms of a way of both describing the form of an animal at the same time keeping your hand very attached to it and also extending it into a symbolic, a mythological, metaphoric space. I cannot believe that we have a Louise Bourgeois in Sag Harbor. Hello, world. Check us out. All right? Yeah. Yeah, and a beautiful, and we've never used the terrace until now. So she inaugurated it, and I informed the foundation they're not getting it back. Haven't heard from them since. Again, speaking of range of attack and stuff, this is a Kate McGuire that is a form made of and coated in birds' feathers. It's incredibly beautiful and iridescent, and you definitely make sure you see that. The sculpture on the left is Tom Deininger. I show it from the side where you can sort of maybe, but not really, make out what the hell it is. A pigeon on a Giacometti walking man sculpture. Again, this goes under the heading of how the hell does anyone do this? It's really quite stunning and poignant. And you should go up and look closely at how it's made, because he tells himself all these funny stories with the objects. So there's a lot of dolls, a lot of naughtiness going on behind this thing. It's quite cool. Yeah, we have 24 Maurizio Catalan pigeons. Your job is to find every one of them. This is a work by an artist, John O'Reilly. This was his graduate project 12, 15 years ago. And it's, I think, one of the most anguishing, poignant sculptures we have in the show. this this wing, we sort of, I tried to set up some things that had some thematic consistency to it, as well as, just incredible objects that may or may not talk to each other. And so this one, and you're only seeing a part of the installation, but it has to do with again a care and sensitivity of moving out into life in the presence of possible death, and then a kind of magical thinking around that. The harpies in the background are Kiki Smith. The deer is a Rosemary Trockle, and the man holding the Bambi is that's Claudette Schroeder. This part of the exhibition deals more with animals as archaeological finds, constructs. There's a feel of them being either discovered in fossils or, coming out of some kind of archaeological dig. The piece, let me see. Yeah, here is one of the dogs, Alan McCullum dogs, and that's taken a direct copy from a dog in Pompeii that was killed instantly in the eruption and lava, and then later extracted when they realized that there were these caverns of molds of these people and animals. So again, this part of the show sort of moves into thinking about nature having the last word. And that there is a sense of the great power of it, that is both in terms of force of nature, but also in terms of time and the length of time. This is a wing that has to do with the artists who see animals in terms of abstraction, beautiful form, a kind of perfection. It's a stream that comes out through artists like Brancusi, sort of, bringing that forward. It's about a kind of perfection. Here's some of the outdoor sculptures. This is a Jim Dine sculpture, recent work. When I saw this, it was in Venice, and I saw it only in photograph, and I saw it from the other side. And you have to look at it from both sides, because the other side is a very sweet, very funny kind of innocent tenderness of this parrot leaning into the pliers. And from this side, it's T-Rex, gonna chew the head off of the... That's Bill Tucker on the left, and Patrick Vilas on the right. He also did the cheetah upstairs. This is a Catherine Thierry, a Belgian sculptor. That's a monkey on the back of the horse. And this is an Angus Fairhurst. Kristen, what's the title of this? I'm sorry, I won't do it again. Is that it? Yeah. Or it won't happen again, something like that. Anyway, that's it. So. Amy, you got it. It's got to be this way. No, it's got to be this way. Yeah, but you got this too.
Oh, whoops. Thanks. It's on.
Oh, it's on.
I think it's on. Thank you. Hey, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the show, and to Sherry and Eric and anybody who figured this out. Thank you. We appreciate it. And Jordan. I was just more going to maybe focus on the practice that I've had a little bit in the last year of curating shows with artists in them. And I'll talk about my own show a little bit at the end, but it's mostly just a quick, I'm going to go through this stuff pretty quickly, but I think not the first time that I did, but maybe the most significant time in a way in America that I curated a show of a museum collection was in 2019 and 20. I was invited to make a show at MoMA, and it was called The Shape of Shape. This is loud. So it had 85 or 90 things in it, and I don't want to go elaborately to talk about it, but just to say that there's a structural way that it relates to the kind of things that I've been doing lately, because I work a lot with horizontal sequence and diagonal and vertical sequence as well. But I work with sequence and editing a lot. And in this case, I put everything on these 3 long sets of tiers, like benches. And it was very much about a kind of neural network of one thing reminding you of the next visually, and moving along across a like a not seemingly kind of organized chronological or thematic thing, but almost like a jumble sale where you had to kind of make the visual connections as you moved across. It was like hyperlinking. And so it looked like this. It was all of the work was organized around the idea of shape as a prevailing idea in composition that I felt like had rarely been explored as a phenomenon unto itself, certainly in my lifetime, like at MoMA. They had color shows and modernism shows and minimalism shows, but they didn't always have or ever have a shape show, so I made a shape show. And then, wow, this is really weird color, really weird. But anyway, I'm skipping over a couple of different other projects that had to do with museum collections, but I was then asked to do a solo show, both at the Kunstmuseum Bern in Switzerland a year ago, and then it traveled, of my own work, and it traveled to Aachen Ludwig Forum, which is the Ludwig collection in the city of Aachen. And both have museum collections. One is the Kunstmuseum, and one is the Ludwig's original collection. And in both cases, I decided to paint the walls and then hang the collection on these crazy painted walls. So I got up on a ladder. It was completely improv. I had no plan. I had no schema. I painted these 2 huge museums, and I would just go. This is like a tiny fragment of one part of it, but I was just moved when I got there to kind of treat the wall as a blank ground, and then arrange the collection sort of within the context of these improvisational works. Sometimes, like the one before, a long hallway of horizontal sequences, like the MoMA sort of logic of going from one thing to the next. Sometimes in kind of clusters like this, where it was a kind of a chronological cluster that had a lot to do with kind of building a kind of still life out of a bunch of stuff. The show, my own solo show, accompanied in both cases the curatorial project, but I'm just showing you in these cases the curatorial project. So then I went to Aachen, which is a ginormous museum, and I decided to, again, I curated their collection, but in this case, I took it one step further, and instead of painting on the wall, I built the walls and then painted on the walls. And I stuffed these huge walls that I built that were on wheels on a diagonal into these very strict cubey kind of rooms, these series of Bauhaus. It's a Bauhaus museum, and the rooms are very square, and I put all the walls, ginormous walls, on an angle, and all the angled walls were my paintings. And I painted them when I got there, totally improv. It took about 2.5 weeks. I did 14 huge walls, and I stuffed them in there. And the walls were double-sided. And I put their collection, without referring back, I just painted whatever. I just wanted to see if I could do it. It was a tightrope walk. I had colors, I had ideas, but I really didn't know what I was doing at all. And then I put all of their collection on a combination of blank walls and these angle walls that like were slotted through the rooms like intrusively. And weirdly, I never looked at the collection when I made the paintings. So I found sync-ups that were really incredible in color, only later, and it just worked. And sometimes, like on the left, there's an Oldenburg, or is it a Liechtenstein? It's a Liechtenstein. It's a Liechtenstein, I think. Yes, sorry, the one on the blank wall. Yeah, sorry, it's not an Oldenburg, obviously it's a Liechtenstein. Thank you. But anyway, sometimes it was just better to put the things on a blank wall, and sometimes it was better to put the stuff on my own walls. And it's extremely destabilizing and chaotic and weird, and it was very much worrisome to the curators in both museums. And in fact, they're keeping these two shows up in both cases for almost a year longer than they were supposed to, because they love them now. So I mixed up all the stuff. I had the nature of the Kunstmuseum Bern collection is very different from the Ludwig. The Ludwig is a museum collection that started in '64, so it's mostly pop art from the West, and then Soviet art from the East. So you're seeing literally half the stuff, you know exactly who it is. It's Warhol, it's Johns, it's Oldenburg and Liechtenstein, and the stuff from the former Soviet republics is usually absolutely not known to you. The little teeny grid of 4 colors is by a famous person named Gerhard Richter, and they told me after I hung it that if the artist was alive, they had to take a picture of it and send it to the artist for their approval, and that he very well might not like this hanging, and so I put a fake Richter behind the real Richter in case they took it down. But the walls were very strange, and they were what I kind of think of as figure on figure. This show sort of ended up as being kind of figure. That's a Baselitz. It ended up being kind of figure on figure. As by the end of the show, I realized that it was kind of a very figural kind of abstract painting. I mean, it had the feeling of a horse, feeling of a shoulder, a soldier, a leg, a doorway. And then I put these kind of figural things on top of them. So when I came to Dia, I'll show just 2 slides of the part. Across the hall from all of that chaos was the outer wall of my show, and it was here's a very small sequential work made out of something like 65 slides of a painting that's in progress, that's moving against these big dots. And then my own show of paintings was kind of hung in that, behind those dots. And I only put this in just to say that this logic of horizontal sequencing has always been greatly part of my way of hanging. So that series of drawings was embedded into the show for purposeful reasons. And then in the middle of the museum was a piece I did in 2019 for 2018 and 2019 and 20 for the Venice Biennale in 2022, which was this is just a corner of it, but it was a long sequence of horizontally mounted upper register of tiny handmade drawings and then giant prints underneath. Whenever I felt like I had something that I wanted to zoom in on, I would print it from a photograph and kind of hang it underneath with these pauses. And I don't want to linger too much, but it was a very choreographed kind of piece that went around a room with a year's worth of reading of a text that goes around the top, and then these interruptive sequences where things get bigger are printed instead of handmade and are sort of at a diagonal. So there's this whole musical composition about how you see the room, where it starts, where things stop, where they continue, et cetera, et cetera. So this kind of logic of organizing things is what I was working with when Jordan and Emily asked me if I would do a show at Dia, which was about a year and a half ago. And I was in the middle of a huge set of printmaking projects at Two Palms Press in New York. And I said, I don't have any paintings because I have all the work I have in this show in Switzerland. So here I am making these prints in New York. And I said, let's make a silkscreen show. Could we do it? I'm making all these silk screens that sort of look like this, but I made 100 of them last year. And I said, they're all monotypes, so they're all individual. They don't repeat. There's no addition. There's just one and then a totally different one. But they're made of recombinant screens and images and rubbing and erasing and putting on and taking off and drawing underneath and dipping it in water and finding the back on the front, et cetera. And I said, could I treat the walls like the way I'm treating the paper of a print? And they said, sure, which was amazing, which was also kind of, I feel like I've been blessed with a set of museum curators this year who have indulged me so graciously, and I have learned so much from their good graces. So I have to thank them a lot. But anyway, so I came here, and as you know, probably, Dia is not a big, giant, huge thing. So I was like, okay, I can do it in 2 weeks. Let's just say that I'll do whatever I do in 2 weeks. And I'll bring 30 of the 100 prints. We've already decided which 30, and we'll put them in a sequence. But first, I'll do something on the walls. I know not what. Can I live there? And they said, no, you can't. But I've learned that at a museum, you say, again, could I really not live there? Can I live there? And on the second time, they always say yes. So I lived in there, and I spent a couple weeks, and I did whatever, this is me doing that, whatever, largely alone with one really sweet assistant tried to take my picture once, but I sent him away. And I basically silk screened the left side and didn't know what I was doing and just used the squeegee directly on the wall and didn't have a screen. I mean, didn't have an image or a screen or anything, but I had all my silk screens. And then I started painting and washing off and drawing on the right side wall. On the other side, the show is called Alternate Side because it was supposed to be about two things facing each other and kind of not doing the same thing. So on the left, you see sort of day one, and on the right, you see sort of day two. And then everything underneath was there and then was washed off. And then my sweet assistant who took that picture, I was like, hold up some of those drawings and see if they look good. And he did. We thought, okay, like how high should these be? And then the really nice silk screeners came, and they helped me silk screen all these things onto the wall, which was great. Beautiful. And then I erased all of it. It was all on there, and then I thought, no, because a lot of my work is about negation, so it was kind of much more kind of Baroque at one, like let's say on Tuesday or Wednesday, and then on Thursday or Friday it was kind of half gone. Then I decided to hang the drawings on the right side across all of that silk screening and just leave the bottom, and I scraped copper over the bottom third, didn't like it, and then rolled white latex paint over it. So, you know, I'm trying to say I don't know what I'm doing at all when I'm doing it, but as Jordan explained to me the other day, this is called heuristic. I now know that heuristic process is about figuring out learning by doing. So at the end of the 2 weeks, I was like, okay, one side will be high, one side will be low, one side will have a greasy pencil line going all the way around it. That's this. Half of it was kind of washed off. The things are set up high because I wanted to establish a high watermark, so to speak, and a hand-drawn baseline, and that's what I did. And the other side of the room is, as it turns, it kind of becomes black and white briefly. The back wall is made out of turmeric that I got from King Cullen and threw and rubbed onto the wall. It was like well, really house paint, copper, turmeric, ink, greasy pencil, whatever was going on. And I wasn't looking. This is the vulgar wall, which faces the classy wall, because I wanted something clownish and hung too low and really messy to go against the like beautiful, empty, much more stately, kind of lovely black and white, not hung too overmuch. This is the overmuch side, and this is the low side, and the other side is the high side, maybe on a number of levels, and that's it. But there was that.
I have one. Well, thank you, Eric, and thank you, Amy, for your presentations, but also for your amazing exhibitions, a real contribution to the East End this summer. Yes, a round of applause. And I also want to thank Sherry and the team here at the church for their collaboration and coordination, and of course, Emily and Chris here from Dia for their amazing collaboration. To kick things off, I want, as artists who curate, I think everyone probably really wants to hear, how does your artistic practice influence your curatorial approach? I'm asking whoever wants to go first. Eric, you're already talking, so.
Hello. Actually, Kristen asked me today if artists who curate in a way that reflects their own work or their own way of seeing other works, et cetera, which I think is the way to think about it. How are we reflected in the choices? I think you certainly could see in Amy's choices the sense of shapes and colors and things like that, kind of handling of materials, that I would say in mine, it's a little less direct in terms of, mostly because I'm known as a painter rather than a sculptor, and it's not that I do animal sculptures, but that sense of feel, of touch of the hand to sculpt something, trying to push it into a realism as opposed to an abstraction. And trying to imbue it with empathy as well as consciousness, things like that are something that are inane and not inane? No, that's not the right. Inherent, thank you. Insipid. Impossible in my work, yeah. Anyway, so that would be the way I'd respond to that.
Amy?
I think the way the work and the way, I didn't start by curating, I started by writing. And I write a lot, and I write a lot of essays, and I've written, I've published a book of essays and stuff that I've written so many that I have a book. But I realized when I started writing, it was more about, I've realized that the process of writing was related to my process because, as you can kind of tell, the process I go through is about contradicting myself, arguing with myself, and then sort of talking about the argument. Like, the work becomes about the process of finding form, finding structure, throwing the structure off, and then regaining the equilibrium. And it's all about, in a way, kind of arguing with myself, with the material, and with art history. And so my Shape of Shape thing came about because I met Ann Temkin and Michelle Kuo once, and they said, if you were going to do one of those artist choice shows, what would you do? Oh, I said to them, are you going to have those when you reopen MoMA? And they said, well, we don't know. If you were going to do one, what would you do? And I said something really bratty, like, well, I would do something interesting to artists, not like what you usually do. And they said, well, like, what would that be? And I said, well, I would, like, make it about shape, which was not improv. And they were like, okay, and then they left, and then the next morning they called me and said, do you want to make a shape show here? And I was like, oh, I can't. I'm going to Germany in 3 weeks, and I'll be gone. And they went, we think you can. So I did do it in 3 weeks. But it was about arguing. It was about saying, I was actually arguing with Yves Lambois about whether or not composition was dead and we were in a non-compositional period. And I said, well, that's completely ridiculous. Composition is inherent. In fact, anything you draw or draw a line or any kind of form that you even transfer from one place to another is a form of composition, of finding form. And that is ongoing, and therefore I will prove it by my. I was always trying to like make a point, which was probably because, as you did, I think we both kind of lived through a period where painting was dead, and the only way to then be a painter was to say, well, either I'm a necrophiliac or, in fact, I'm not dead. So it's an argument to begin with. So I think, I won't call it an argument, but I would say, contradiction, dialectic, discourse, fighting, pushing, pulling, all of that stuff, I think, is part of at least my process that I like to show. And so there's always an argument, alternate side.
Thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit about staging. I feel like in both of your curatorial sort of approaches, there is this element of almost mise en scène, or sort of creating an environment. You talked to Eric about wanting to create a sense of another world. You're sort of entering this domain of the animal. You're sort of entering the arc. Amy, in our show in Bridgehampton, it's a very totalizing environment, really going beyond the frame onto the wall. And you sort of have a similar scenographic approach in the exhibitions in Bern and Aachen, and sort of thinking about creating a context for the work to sort of exist in and seep into. Could you guys maybe elaborate on this a bit?
There's many sort of layers to how the things get put where they put and how they resonate or not. We did something which we hadn't done to date, which was we painted the walls specific colors, and that was, trying to extend the sense of water, arc, submersion, whatever. I like the back wall, which is this dark blue, and then the wood, because it looks like the back of the boat's blown off kind of feel to it. So it was setting up a kind of drama that either, is very elegant as well, so it wasn't overly dramatic, but it set up an undercurrent, if I can use that pun. Anyway, so that was one way of thinking about it. Then there were certain works that had a kind of feeling of formal concern to them that seemed to go together. Then there were works that had a kind of inherent sort of mysticism to them that, an animal of a certain kind of otherness that was spiritual or magical power. And then there was the scene with the small person carrying the Bambi started to actually retell the story of Bambi. It was like, oh my God, there, which I was kind of leaning into and leaning away from as a thing, thinking it was probably trivializing the individual artists. The difference between painting and sculpture is that painting controls its own context. That inside the rectangle, it controls its light, its surface, its gestural, its depictive, its narrative, its time sequence, etc. Everything's inside that, so it's a contained thing. And you can then more or less put it anywhere, this painting, and it stays what it is. Sculpture is something that does not have an external context. Everything about it is something that is changed by the context that it's put in. Sculpture has to have its context, deeply embedded in its reason for being, in a different way than, as I say, painting does, because painting can control scale. Sculpture, it's one scale in a room, it's another scale out at a park and stuff like that. So, trying to figure out how to put that together within the sense of the sculpture show, large, small, intimate, quiet, et cetera, and have that work is a challenge. So.
Yeah, that's super interesting, actually, because I was thinking when you said that it's a narrative. It's a way of building narrative around the work. Like when you said, the back of the thing is like blown out. So it's a kind of pictorial narrative, but abstractly rendered, or it's suggested. Yeah. Anyway, I think that's really interesting. But I think for me, the world revolves around language for me. I mean, I'm literally writing like a foreign language as a painter to myself. And I don't make a huge distinction between a kind of calligraphy and a kind of brushstroke. And I've thought a lot about the legibility question of like where language starts to not be legible and how that may turn into a kind of visuality. And so for one thing, I'm interested in the way we read language in the West from left to right in rows, not columns. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about the horizon line as a line of writing and making paintings in all kinds of ways around this notion of the horizon and the written line. And I think about a page as a wall, as a poem. And I think about empty space being choreographed in that page space, wall space, boundary. So there's that kind of staging. There's also the thing where like those walls, all these walls that I'm painting will be erased. They're not saleable and they can't come with and they can't be monetized and they will be whited out, which I find really important to me because it talks about, in a way, it makes more poignant, I think, time and finitude and being alive and it's being no longer there. And I think those questions are a form of staging. Like, because people say, like, literally, Chris, who's the worker at Dia, said, my mom says, how's she going to sell these? And I was like, well, I'm not. And so she said, and I thought about it in Aachen too, because I made these sculptural walls, and my dealer came and said, we could try to sell these. And I was like, but you can't, because they won't be the same thing. They'll have something I didn't put on them, and they also need something on them, and they can't have it. So, no. And so there's this kind of staging of temporality, and I feel like the time element is the most important thing to me in painting. I'm always trying to either compress it or open it. And so I think time and finitude is urgent to speak about, which is a bit tragic and also relates to the art question and the tragedy of what we're going through and what you were considering and the extinction problem and all of that. So I feel like that's staged. And then the one other thing I would say is I wasn't a conceptual artist at grad school, and I remember putting a show up once in the, 90s or something, and I thought, oh my God, it default looks conservative because it's a bunch of paintings. Oh shit. I don't want that sort of automatic read where these are like trophy things that are great and grand and marvelous. I actually want to debase them a little bit. So I'm always looking for ways to kind of put a joke in, put a cartoon next to an abstraction, make a schmutz mark on the wall. There's a kind of destabilizing value that I think can only be, well, for me, it had to be established by a contradictory impulse.
Amy, so much of your work is about editing. You really have these, layers of accumulation and redaction. So I'm curious to talk about editing within sort of the practice of curation with both of you, this idea of developing a checklist, editing a checklist, and coming down to what is essentially going to be on the wall or in the room, especially since you both tackle such huge topics, such universal thematics such as shape or animals. So how do you begin to refine that and come to a selection as to what is going to constitute the exhibition?
You're the one with the show.
What? You're the one with the show.
She was talking about you specifically.
Oh.
No. Well, I was just
No.
using Amy as a prompt to get into the idea of editing. So this idea, it's a question for both of you as to how did you, Eric, for instance, come up with this final checklist, especially when dealing with such a large theme such as animals? Are you dealing with shape?
I can tell you
or
one
color?
funny thing. I said to them, I want to do a show on shape. They were like, okay, come in. So they were like, do a trial balloon. We have 3 weeks. So I went in and I looked through the slide catalog literally 12 hours a day for about a week, and I had 800 choices. And I was like, there's 800 works. And they were like, yeah, you have to cut it to 80. And I was like, fuck. So that was a problem, an interesting problem. And so I thought at night, one night, on a sleepless night, it can't be just shape, because then that's everything in the world. There's nothing in the world that's not a shape. So what it has to be is a shadow, because a shadow is a register of your own body in time and in space. So if it functions as a shadow, it's therefore indexical to your body. Therefore, I could include race, gender, period, time, subjectivity, independent, autonomy. I could engage with issues of people, who they are, where they come from, where they're standing, the earth. You know what I mean? I thought all of a sudden shape could be made more pared down if it went through the keyhole of shadow as a concept. So that was like an edit. That's one thing, is just to get rid of stuff. And then the other thing is love of negation. To build a more compelling argument by creating an argument. Editing is kind of taking away. So you add and you take away, and then you have space.
I love that distinction between the shape and the shadow. I think that's a fantastic way of approach, anyway. But I think you should also tell the audience about your score.
Oh, yeah.
This blows my mind.
I was telling Eric and April the other day, I always get asked, how do you know when you're done? Because I go on with painting and unpainting and blah, blah, blah. So I have a close relative who's a minimalist composer, and when I was talking to him in around 2018, I said, how do you end? It's so hard. And he said, I don't worry about that. I just set up a system, and then when the system works, the piece is done. And I was like, oh, I need a system. I borrowed from abstract expressionism. Now I can borrow from minimalism. And so I thought, well, what do I do anyway? And whatever I do, I'll just reduce it to 2 passes. And so I thought, well, I search for a figure, I deal with color, I ruin everything, I think of a pattern, and then there's a kind of artificial wild card where I have to resolve it and move on. So I'll say there can be 2 passes of each of those things in a painting, and at the 10 or 12 moment, you're out. You got to go. The painting's dead out. Get out of there. The thing is done. And so when I curated, it's germane to curating because when I went to when I went to Aachen, I was like, how am I going to enter this weird pop collection? And I thought, well, I'll look for things that are about ruin, things that are about searching for a figure, things that are about color, things that are about pattern, and then a wild card. And those were the filters through which I approached that particular collection. It wasn't the same as in Bern, but that was useful as a set of criteria. So I realized my criteria. And the wild card gives you a freebie, so you don't have to have a set criteria.
You have 2 wild cards, right?
Yeah, so you really can go crazy. How do you edit?
The thing is, it's a universal question, right? When do you know you're done, et cetera. For me, process-wise, I start with an enthusiasm for beginning something, and try to find a way into the moment as quickly as I can. So sloppiness is part of that. It's just a way of getting it going. And having it be starting from not precious, moving towards more of a precious or refined, exactitude about it. But what I find in the process, because and I identify with your, negations, your scrapings, your attack, a reattack, and stuff. I think that's an essential basis for artists, whether it's, imagistic, figurative, realist, or whatnot. But I find that there's a moment at which I'm looking at my painting not as a creator, but simply as somebody looking at a scene going, what's going on here? Why am I feeling this way? Who are these people? And what's coming? What's ended? All of those questions are present in the work, and I'm not the painter going, is that edge hard enough? Is that color saturated enough? Is that, that kind of thing. So it kind of evolves to that finished place. But
Eric, in that regard, I'm curious, for this show, you mentioned that there was a 3-dimensional model. How much of the floor plan, maintained versus what sort of shifted on the ground, especially considering, there's a real sort of relationality with the sculptures and sort of these animals and their faces, et cetera. Like, how much of it did you sort of, how much of it was predetermined versus did you allow there to be room for improvisation on the floor?
Yes and no. I mean, we have a foam core model of the church, and we printed out all the images, but they're not an exact size. They're just reminders of the images and stuff. And I would set things out. Then I got Sherry involved in it as a second opinion to get her input into it, and things began to shape a certain way. There were things that we knew for sure, which is that elephant's going in the middle of the room, and we also knew that the Deborah Butterfield had to find a place immediately because the museum, the Whitney, which loaned us the piece, had a lot of restrictions attached to it. It was something that had to stay flat coming into the space. I mean, picture this. It had to go up a set of stairs, through a door that just had an inch on either side of it, up another set of stairs, into the space, all staying flat the whole time, right? So the gantries and the gizmos and everything that the guys put together to make this happen was, it was like you might as well build a dam or something. It was phenomenal. But the thing is that we had to know where it went, because the other part of it was, once you set it down, it can't move. That it's the piece they're concerned about, its fragility. It can't move. So we had an elephant, and we had a horse. Then there was some things that we knew the Nicola Hicks white owl needed to go against a wall, dark color wall, etc. So we had some positions going that way. And then there was discovery. There was a lot of things that moved around in the space. Some not greatly moved, but some, sort of shifted placement. Some actually moved from one area to another. So it had an organic quality to it as it went around. But
Definitely it feels very alive and organic in that way. Both of the exhibitions on view, and also, Amy, your previous shows that you were speaking to, have this sense of play, there is this sense of play or even a humor, sort of you were mentioning jokes and so forth. I'm curious to hear from you both your approach or how you think about play or humor when you're approaching curating your own work, or how do you feel like it operates within sort of the exhibition context, if you will?
We're never not funny.
yeah,
I mean, that's obvious. That's obvious. But, just thinking, do you think about a playfulness?
It's not like something we put in.
Yeah.
It's just you can't get rid of that.
Okay.
I don't know about you, but I think
I'm not fully
funny.
understanding the question.
I guess I'm thinking, how can play, sort of be a strategy
play?
for maybe communicating other forms of criticality? It almost seems like there's an allure that is maybe a way into maybe more complex ideas or forms or thoughts, in both of the ways that you all sort of operate. There's a sense of immediacy or humor at times in both of these shows, I feel, but there's also many other things that are perhaps not as readily apparent, perhaps.
I grew up in Chicago. We talked about it. And when you grow up in Chicago, as you know from living there, there's this alternative art world of comic art, the Chicago Imagists. And in the 70s, when I was a kid, there was Zap Comics and R. Crumb, and it made sense with Jim Nutt and Gladys Nilsson to look at those kinds of, and also Guston. So it was really clear to me, for me, you lived there too, but for me, who grew up there, it was actually a shock to come to New York as a student and go, oh, they like these really ugly paintings that are hideous. They're gray and they're mushy, and there's no cartoon in it, and there's nothing funny at all. It's in fact distressingly empty. And so, abstraction was fascinating and amazing to me because it was deeply unfunny seeming. I didn't get that Barnett Newman was being witty. I just didn't get it. But it was like I moved to New York, to the big city, and then everything was serious. And I did not lose my sense that humor was this alternate route. And I thought that painting was dead. I was told that at school. And I thought there's got to be a way for this to be okay. And the people I looked at were filmmakers and performance artists. And people even from Rauschenberg on. And they were witty, they were funny, they were goofy. Deschamps is funny, Man Ray is funny. A lot of people, Eva Hesse is funny in a way. She's playful. People were obviously doing a lot more things. Also, it was the 70s. Robert Smithson's essays are pretty much the funniest thing I've ever read. There was a lot of things around that were challenging the sobriety and the stability of the work that was made right before I moved to New York. I would say postmodernism is funnier than some modernism. So, you know what I mean? Like, there was this moment that I arrived at where there was Mike Kelly and there was Kippenberger and there was all kinds of things, and you would have to be pretty stuffy not to have that. You know, given my Chicago packaging, you'd have to be almost insane not to pick up on that. You know, not to keep that, because the other alternative would be extremely stuffy.
I think certainly from the 70s forward has been there's probably earlier than that, but a concern with deconstruction. And its concern with deconstruction has to do with everything falling apart.
Exactly.
And that's not just within the art historical framework of questioning traditions and questioning styles and stuff like that, but within the flow of our culture, our moment, our society, et cetera, it's been a constant sort of evaluation, reevaluation that has been taking place. And artists have been trying to deal with that in their own individual ways. One of the truths of tragedy is that if you want to get other people to sympathize and empathize, make it a little bit easier through humor as a way of bringing them into a recognizable shared space, right? Because it seems like at the same time you're taking them down, you're also lightening it in a way. And that's something that you see in a lot of, consistently within the art world, especially in the way it deals with irony, deals with humor as a way of doing that.
I mean, I think it's interesting because there's a way where humor is descending, where it becomes clownish, and there's a way that humor aspires to ascent, where it becomes irony. Where it's sarcastic, or it's a bit mean, or it's about it's kind of judgy. And then there's a way where you become a buffo, which is a different kind of tradition and of awkwardness. I like awkwardness and clumsiness and inelegance on purpose. It's my taste. I like folk art also because it's a little bit funny. It's not the Renaissance. Mm-hmm. And I think that, but there are these kinds of humor, so there was a moment in my art school period where, or even in more recent time, where I thought there were certain works that were, to be a dandy was to me kind of a problem. Because on the one hand, it was interesting because it was about class and gender and gayness and, class relations. But on the other hand, to be a dandy was to be superior and was to be scornful of whatever lay below. But then on the other hand, real dandies were actually not aristocrats. They were making fun of, sort of from the middle. And so, humor, as we now know, because so many funny people have been canceled, is dangerous and is complicated and is very political. And so, I think all those things are part of, if you're like I say, a sentient person, you're taking all of this in a way. There were ways that there was funny peculiar, not just funny ha-ha, too. So camp is kind of funny, it's a kind of coded funny where it's queer or it's off or it's other, you know what I mean? So I don't feel like, the only thing I don't totally feel in total alignment with what you said was just that I feel like it's not so much for me about community building. It's more about like distinctions being made, some of which I like and some of which I don't like. You know what I mean? But it's a kind of like sociological thing about distinction. You know, where you're working a very you may be excluding people very precisely. And in my life, I was wanting to make an exclusionary kind of work to the people who were too fancy. I wanted to make work that was kind of punk. It was kind of ugly and awkward and weird.
There's definitely a social politics at play in this humor, for sure. And I'm curious in that regard to maybe talk a little bit about audience and how you perceive or, envision or conceive this idea of audience, or who you're making work for or curating exhibitions for. And perhaps that shifts when you have your artist hat on versus your curator hat. I'm curious to hear about that. But, we did talk a little bit also the other day about, upstairs, there are not necessarily like in-your-face extended labels for each work. Rather, there's sort of a privileging of direct material experience. And, there's more information if you choose to seek it out. This very much reflects what idea we call an unmediated approach. We do not, privilege ideas of biography or sort of like what the work is about, but rather allow visitors to have a more embodied experience. And, should you want more information, it is available to you versus it being, say, sort of the immediate scaffolding of what the visitor or viewing experience is meant to be like. So I guess I'm curious to hear what you think of as the ideal engagement with your work, or the ideal sort of way of experiencing your work, or who you imagine that audience to be, or, when you're curating, when you're making your work, how does that sort of unfold in your mind?
Well, the mission of the church here has been from the start to try to find ways to empower an audience walking in the door who doesn't use art in their life, but yet to have them come in the door feeling that they already know something about what they're about to see, and that's the thing that they're about to see is something that's generally shared and connected to, both their personal lives and also to the general community, et cetera. So what does that mean? We do thematic shows. Our first show was cars. Again, that sense that everybody knows something about cars and has strong feelings about it, ambivalent feelings about it, whatever it is, they know something about it. They know how to drive, or they know why they don't drive, And then they walk in the door and they see things they recognize but hadn't seen before, things that they didn't actually think about, and that's what we're looking for, is giving an audience a moment where they are both simultaneously familiar with something that they've never seen before, and it takes them directly into the world of creativity, which for me, I believe is the state of health. That's where we need to bring each other into the creative spaces. It enlivens our lives. It enlivens our sense of self, and I think it's something that enhances and empowers. So that's the thing. Obviously, the animal show moved along precisely those lines of as I've said before, nobody talks to each other in an elevator till the dog shows up. Once the dog shows up, all of a sudden you're in a community, and so that is something that I was aspiring for with this show. I wanted to create something that ran the risk of being incredibly popular. and at the same time exquisitely artistic. And that those things that I, on a personal level, believe are not as far apart as other people might believe, that those things don't go well together. Populism and artistic, excellence don't necessarily go well together. I think they do, depending on what that thing is. And I think the work upstairs is a great example of that. The other thing I like about theme shows is that it gives you the opportunity. If you a general way of thinking of the history of art is that it was visual language, physical language based on telling narratives, cultural narratives, religious narratives, historical narratives, things along those lines. It was something where the narratives were shared, generally shared, so everybody knew what they were looking at. The artistic excellence came in with subtle variations on a generally accepted genre, format, theme, and so that was something that went along for a very long time until modernism decided to blow that wide open, change it from generally held to individually held. And artists began to try to struggle with their look, their language, their way of saying something. And over a long period of time, we lost where the common narrative is that links those who aren't making it to those who are making it, right? There was a period of time where artists were more than happy to say fuck you to the general public. This is taking it into the spiritual quest realm, the soul-searching, soul individual kind of thing. It was something that I struggled with personally because I wanted to be understood. And, I was trained as an abstract painter, and I was obviously imitating people who are far better at it than I was, so I wasn't particularly paid attention to that way. But I was also, in my process, ascribing all kinds of personal narrative meanings to why I was making this mark, this shape, this color, and nobody was getting it. and I just felt like, I got to change here. I'm trying to talk to people, and nobody can even hear what the hell I'm saying. So it began to move into a different direction that was obviously more and more recognizable. But I'm afflicted by a horrible contradiction of feelings and passions. One is my work is documenting the decline of a culture, a family, a society that I deeply love. And I'm painfully documenting the points of intersection where chances are missed, where opportunities are missed, where the thing of fulfillment is going unfulfilled, et cetera, et cetera. And so I have that as my artistic practice. And at the same time, I have a profound belief in community and in wanting to pull people together into shared positive experiences, to sort of bring people into a space of vulnerability and support that comes from a community. And so, investing in Sag Harbor, literally and in terms of every other activity and feeling we have about the place, was very much a part of that. Is there a way to help create a community that is healthy and is vibrant and is, et cetera? And that's the experiment that we're working on here, sort of night and day, trying to make happen. And, and as I say, it's set against this other affliction, which is my essential being has said, it's all fucked. It's all going down. There's little hope. I mean, even this thing of doing this very positive, wonderful thing that we're doing here, I'm thinking, we only have a matter of days before this becomes Provincetown. But this becomes a cliche of an art community. What can we do? And anyway, I'm sorry I loaded that all on you. But,
Amy?
I don't even remember what the question was.
No, that was thoughts on audience, or how you sort of perceive or think of audience in relationship to your work or your curatorial projects, or the experience you hope that they have, or what you imagine they might take away. And I think it is interesting to think about, too, what Eric was saying about, when he was creating abstract work, he was putting in certain, coded ideas of what it meant to him. And you were sort of also talking earlier about this language of forms that is sort of, illegible, or like ideas of legibility, and how does that figure into your ideas of audience and their engagement in terms of what is legibly legible, how much of your internal processes or inner workings are actually, transfiguring into the paint itself, and like how do you sort of imagine that interface being most successful?
I don't know. I don't really. I mean, I'm not running an art center. I'm just a painter. So I don't have a long spiel.
But I guess when you're intervening in public institutions, like MoMA, for instance,
Well, I made a show that I felt really passionate about, deeply, with all the tragedy and all of the belief that things are falling apart, and I want to do something that speaks to artists. I'm more interested in artists than I don't have like a community center, so it's not like I'm living in a town with a thing, but I feel perfectly outside. I mean, I don't feel like I'm always running around at some party at a collector's house. That's not how I live. So I already do have a community of artists that I am deeply in touch with, who are my friends, that are my family, basically, and they're all, to some extent, struggling with what we're dealing with, always, for whatever reason. So I feel like I don't sit in some gold chair, and I made that show at MoMA because I was given the chance, and I wanted to do something ahistorical, achronological, confusing. There were no labels at all. There was a booklet, but there was no information. It demanded that you be visually acute with looking from one thing to the next. It put a lot of burden on the viewer, which I think is important. I deeply love abstraction and strangeness and illegibility, and I think I'm much more cynical than maybe Eric is about community building, but I also, I just trust in, I got amazing feedback from people like Aruna D'Souza, for example, who's an art historian that studied 19th century French painting and writes contemporary political books. And she was like, this is like throwing all of art history out the window and making it a different way. And so, I got people seem to relate to the reordering of history, to the reconsideration of what every category in the museum was supposed to be. And I was just simply, I didn't have a strategy. I tried to do something from the heart and it came about, and people said that they respected the part of MoMA that let the openness that room offered. So I don't know. I believe in all the principles that I said I work with because I passionately believe in them. But I think destabilization, strangeness, humor, humility, kindness, openness, weirdness, thinking while you're doing your best, not being too fancy, not being snobby, loving art to the maximum, but also fighting with its stupid artistry that's probably wrong, is important. That's all I can do.
That sounds like a lot. Wow.
Should we stop?
Yeah, I was gonna say. I think
Like,
that's a.
where is
I think
this-
that's a
when does this
perfect.
end?
I think that's a perfect moment to transition
We're
to
transitioning?
audience questions. Or do we have time for a few? Or what's the thoughts on that? Should we?
You guys want a couple? We have we didn't put it on the agenda.
Okay. Well then.
Then it's over.
Then it's over. Then we can all chat casually. Thank you all. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Eric. And thank you, the church.
Thank you all for an incredible dialogue. Thanks so much for being here. Everybody, see you soon. Thank you.